A D-48. A girl barely 15 steps across the stone threshold of the palace on the Palatine Hill. White silk clings to her young body like a second skin. Golden hair is crowned with myrtle branches, a wreath sealing that moment when innocence and power are forced into the same frame. The Senate rises. The crowd fills the hall with a murmur mixing hope and ambition. Emperor Claudius, 50 years old, approaches with his slight limp. As words knot in his throat, he takes her small hand into his palm. Her name is already written into history. His will reshape history's form, Valeria Messalina. Remember it. Rome thought it had forgotten. They expected deliverance from her. Caligula's blood has not yet fully been scrubbed from these corridors. 4 years of madness, executions for entertainment, incest rumors staged like theater, a reign where reason and restraint melted away, a rule so far gone that finally his own guards killed him, tearing him apart in a passage beneath this very palace. Rome now wants order, wants morality, wants an heir. They dress the young bride as a symbol of hope. Yet within 10 years, this palace will transform into a place even ancient writers recount with shuddering reluctance. Senators will bow to her will. Daughters of aristocratic families will enter rooms and emerge as different people, sealed with secrets they'll carry for life, silent and broken. She will organize competitions that astound even experienced prostitutes. She will construct a blackmail network reminiscent of modern intelligence agencies. While bearing the title of Empress, she will marry another man in broad daylight and before witnesses, as if testing whether Rome has the courage to stand against her. When Rome finally responds, her statues will be dragged through the streets, shattered. Her name will be scraped from inscriptions. Official documents will be rewritten as though she never lived. Damnatio memoriae, the curse of memory. And 2,000 years later, you're still here, still listening. Because the things Rome tried hardest to erase return as history's most stubborn shadows. So what happens when corruption isn't a side effect of power, but power itself? Return to AD 38. The forum vibrates with noise. Silk merchants display their fabrics. Senators debate grain prices heatedly. Children run between marble columns. On the surface, everything looks solid, everything powerful. Rome appears invincible, but rot has already begun. Tiberius died 2 years ago, a prisoner of his fears, despised, an emperor who withdrew into himself on Capri. Then came Caligula. 4 years of boundless deviation, executions for amusement, a horse allegedly appointed to the Senate, senators humiliated at their own tables. When the Praetorian Guard finally moved on January 24th, AD 41, 29 stab wounds closed an era. His wife died beside him. His infant daughter's head was smashed against a wall. Rome first took a deep breath, then recoiled in horror. Who was next? They found him hiding behind a curtain. Claudius, the family's ridiculed uncle. The man mocked for his stammer, his limping walk, the drool he couldn't control. 50 years old. He had neither desired nor expected the throne. But the guards proclaimed him emperor, not for merit, but because he was the only surviving adult, Julio Claudian. Rome had to dress someone in purple before sliding into civil war. Claudius knew this was an interim period. He needed to produce legitimacy quickly, an heir, a dynasty, a sign that the gods had not abandoned Rome. So he married Valeria Messalina, his third cousin, 15 years old, part of a bloodline traced back to Aeneas, a beauty poets would write odes about. Pale skin, golden hair, a face symmetrical as if sculpted. She had been raised for such a role, trained to embody virtue, to lower her gaze, to speak softly, to represent the idea of chastity. On paper, a flawless empress. The Senate approved. The people cheered ecstatically. The empire seemed to have a future again. But no one asked aloud. What happens when you take a child and dress her as a goddess? When you place her in a palace where doors open at a single gesture? In a world where senators bow before her? Where generals wait for her approval? where her husband is twice her age and trembles at losing power, when you tell her all her value lies in her womb and her purity, that she must remain modest, obedient, and spotless, that she must be virtue's living image, when you give unlimited power to someone whose only instruction has been, restrain yourself? When the distance between the role she's forced to play publicly and the person she wants to be privately becomes a chasm, what happens? Rome is about to learn the answer. If this moment doesn't hold you here to witness what happens when power meets forbidden desire, you're missing the lesson our ancestors passed down at the cost of their lives. Because what follows isn't just a scandal. This is the story of how empires begin to unravel not on the front lines, but in the bedroom. The first 2 years proceed almost like a textbook. Messalina first gives Claudius a daughter, Claudia Octavia. Then a son arrives, Britannicus, named after his father's British campaign. The Senate breathes easy. The empire now has heirs. She appears at state ceremonies, plainly draped, head bowed, eyes downcast. Every movement arranged to represent virtue. The ideal Roman matrona. In public, she is everything Rome expects of her. But in private life, Rome has always divided women into two, matrona and meretrix, wife and whore, the sacred and the vulgar. One lives in the atrium, raises children, guards family honor. The other exists in the lupanar, the brothel where men set civilization aside. This order is built on the two worlds never intersecting. Messalina chooses to be both. The first rumors begin circulating around AD 42. A senator returns from Ostia later than expected. Business ran long, and he's in Rome that night. On impulse, he turns towards Subura, the city's red light district. Narrow alleys soaked in the smell of urine and cheap wine, cramped insula blocks rising in the flickering light of oil lamps. Darkness swallows easily. He chooses a room, leaves his fee. The woman enters. A dark wig, heavy kohl around the eyes, an overpowering scent, myrrh and rose as if trying to disguise something more expensive. The woman turns to him. Their eyes meet. He recognizes her, Rome's empress. Not a resemblance, not a rumor. Herself. According to Tacitus, yes, he wrote decades after the events. Yes, he had his own perspective, but he was someone who could gather information from palace circles. This wasn't a one-time occurrence. It's alleged that Messalina used the name Liza and regularly visited a brothel run by a woman named Scylla. Not for money, not from necessity, for arousal. Consider the psychological dimension. Every customer who doesn't recognize her unknowingly becomes complicit in a crime. Every man who does recognize her is now bound to silence, because to whom can you report an empress? She wasn't just violating rules, she was turning the hypocrisy that held those rules upright into a tool. Roman morality was always something performed. Senators had mistresses, generals visited brothels, married men slept with slaves. No one questioned it. But women, especially noble women, especially the empress, were expected to remain above desire, like a marble statue, like a fertile symbol. Messalina looked at that cage and walked out. She would return before dawn, remove the wig, wash off the cheap scent, wrap herself in imperial silk, attend morning offerings to Vesta, the same calm expression on her face, as if the previous night never happened. But the brothel was only a testing ground. The real operation was conducted inside the palace. Picture the feasts. Rome's elite reclined on silk-covered couches around low tables. Roasted dormice glazed with honey served on golden plates. Wine flowing from jewel-encrusted cups. Senators conversing in low voices. Generals discussing developments in Britain. Everything excessively Roman, excessively civilized. Until Messalina gives a small signal. Servants exit the hall, doors close. New guests are brought in, gladiators fresh from the arena, carrying the smell of sand, blood, and sweat, theater actors, foreign prisoners, sometimes even young sons of patrician families invited under the pretense of discussing their fathers' careers. What happens next, sources relay with both revulsion and curiosity. Forced performances, humiliating competitions. Senators paired with political rivals and expected to entertain the empress. Married, respectable, terrified aristocratic women, under the frozen gaze of their husbands on opposite couches, forced to play the role of prostitute. Refusal is not an option. A tribune declines an invitation. 3 days later, he's found in the Tiber. A noble tries to leave early. Within a week, his family loses their estate. The message is clear. The empress does not accept no. Then comes the competition. The story appears in Pliny the Elder's texts. Yes, he's a natural history writer, but this detail stuck in minds. A contest between the empress and a famous prostitute named Scylla. Not for money, but for honor. Who can endure more partners in a single night? 25. Messalina wins. Pliny records this with almost clinical horror and fascinated precision, as if documenting an eclipse. Real? Exaggerated propaganda? We'll never know for certain. But the narrative survived because it captured a truth Romans couldn't articulate openly. A woman using her sexuality not as a tool of submission, but as a form of domination. Rome had no appropriate language for this, so they turned her into legend. Yet legends don't emerge from nothing. They're echoes of something people saw and couldn't forget, couldn't erase even if they wanted to. The palace becomes a stage for power, a system where humiliation is the valid currency, a place where senators wait at her door at dawn to beg favor, then leave at midnight having done things they can never speak of again. Aristocratic families send their daughters to the empress's chambers and pray for their return. Most come back, some don't. No one demands accountability because everyone has learned the game's rules by now. Messalina doesn't just use power, she collects it, piece by piece, person by person. She builds such a vast network of complicity that anyone wanting to oppose her would first have to destroy themselves. Everyone who participates is chained. Everyone who witnesses is an accomplice. She doesn't need the Senate's official approval. Their shame is sufficient. Loyalty can be dissolved. Shame is permanent. And while all this unfolds, Claudius continues working. He commissions aqueducts, reforms the judicial system, extends the empire's borders to Britain. A dismissed but competent ruler. Doesn't he know? Of course he does. Rome talks, senators whisper, his freedmen kneel, begging him to intervene. But what can he do? She's the mother of his children. Moving against her means admitting before the entire empire that he's been cuckolded. That risks civil war. That hands ammunition to those who'll say, weak man who can't even control his household. So he does what many powerful men have done when confronted with unbearable truth. Ignores it, works harder, assumes the rot hasn't crossed boundaries. Until A.D. 48, their marriage's 10th year, the year of collapse. Autumn. Claudius is in Ostia overseeing Rome's grain flow, a vital duty. The city runs on wheat from Egypt. The slightest disruption could trigger revolt. He's behaving as the needed administrator, over accounts, tracking shipments, pursuing order. During those same hours in Rome, Messalina is at a wedding ceremony. She marries Gaius Silius, consul designatus, one of the Republic tradition's most powerful senators. Young, attractive, ambitious. A figure representing everything Claudius doesn't. But what's truly shocking is this. The relationship isn't hidden. It's not a clandestine affair conducted in shadows. There are witnesses, contracts, official vows, and it's done while she's still the emperor's wife. Ancient sources record this with almost frozen astonishment. Tacitus describes that moment when Rome's elite witnessed the empress taking another husband in broad daylight, as if the rules no longer apply to her. Was this a power display? A coup rehearsal? Did she believe Claudius couldn't respond? Did Silius think marriage brought him closer to the throne? Or had Messalina crossed the threshold where transgression itself became the target? Where she derived pleasure not from secrecy, but from defiance? We don't know their minds. We only know what they did. And Rome, Worn down, accustomed, silenced, Rome finally encounters a boundary. The news first reaches Narcissus, Claudius's most trusted freedman. He goes to Ostia, finds the emperor over grain accounts. Imagine this moment. How do you tell a ruler his wife has married another man? How do you convince him of a truth that initially seems absurd? But reports arrive in succession. Senators confirm. Witnesses who were silent until yesterday now speak because questions are being asked. The final detail arrives. A marriage contract has been signed. Legal, witnessed, indisputable. The sense of ridiculousness dissolves in that instant. Imagine his face. The emperor who spent years being dismissed. The scholar mocked for his stammer. The man who survived through patience. Humiliated openly and legally while working to keep Rome from starving. The rising rage isn't hot, it's cold, clear and definitive. He returns to Rome with Praetorian guards behind him. They find her in Lucullus's gardens, on the city's edge, in a sprawling estate. Trees transported from across the empire. Fountains that never stop flowing. Gardens that hosted many celebrations, many secret gatherings. Her mother Lepida is with her. The old woman begs her daughter, flee, hide, do something, anything. But Messalina is frozen like stone. Some sources say she tried to write a plea for mercy. Others say she did nothing, just stood there, unable to believe this was truly ending. That after bending Rome for 10 years, she couldn't accept Rome was now straightening against her. The soldiers approach. Their faces aren't unfamiliar. She's seen them at the palace. Perhaps some were guests at her villa. Now they've come for her. She kneels, begs, invokes her children. Octavia and Britannicus, 9 and 7 years old. Her final cards. She lays out whatever she has. But the soldiers don't speak. The order is definitive. She reaches for a dagger. Someone's, perhaps her mother's, perhaps a guard's. Her hand trembles. She presses the steel to her throat. She can't do it. A tribune steps forward. His name didn't make it into history, but his action did. He plunges the blade. Valeria Messalina Augusta, Empress of Rome, 25 years old, lies bleeding on the grass where she once brought senators to their knees. Claudius then declares Damnatio memoriae, the curse of memory. Her statues dragged through streets, shattered, her name scraped from inscriptions. Official records rearranged as if she never existed. The intended message is clear. This didn't happen. But 2,000 years later, we're still telling it. You've witnessed an empress's fall. Not in war, not in plague, crushed under the weight of power that knew no limits. If these kinds of stories remind you that the past must not be forgotten, must not be covered over, subscribe to Sable Historians. Because the past doesn't stay buried underground, it echoes. The Roman Forum still stands. The Colosseum welcomes millions every year. But most of the Palatine Hill where the emperors lived, where Messalina ruled, is rubble today. Visitors stand before broken columns, collapsed walls, taking photos, reading information panels about Augustus and Nero. Most don't know they're standing in rooms where defiance, whispers, and commands once echoed. Claudius remarried within months. Agrippina Minor, his niece, more calculating, more patient than Messalina. She would eventually poison Claudius and elevate her own son Nero to the throne, opening the door to a new era of madness. Messalina's children suffered fates nearly as tragic. Her daughter Octavia was forced to marry her stepbrother Nero, then executed on adultery charges. She was 22, very close to the age her mother died. Her son Britannicus was poisoned at 14, most likely by Nero, to eliminate every potential threat to the throne. He suddenly fell ill during a dinner, his life extinguished before anyone could intervene. The Senate chose to treat Messalina as though she never existed, but soldiers remembered, servants remembered, families who sent their daughters to her villa and quietly got them back remembered. Even if memory was erased from official records, it wasn't erased from minds. There's something else chilling about this story. How much of what we know about Messalina is based on truth? Our sources, Tacitus, Suetonius, Juvenal, were all male and all wrote decades after her death. Each had political or moral motivations to turn her into a monster. Roman propaganda used a similar template repeatedly. Powerful women threatening male authority were often branded with sexual deviance. Cleopatra, Agrippina Minor, Livia, Messalina. The script hardly changed. Does this mean she was innocent? No. The marriage to Silius is real, an event even her defenders don't deny. Political corruption within the palace is real. Blackmail mechanisms were established. Some who resisted her died. But the brothel stories, the competitions, the exact numbers, we'll never know precisely where truth ends and propaganda begins. What we know clearly, a 15-year-old girl was married to a man in his 50s. She was taught her value lay in her purity and fertility. She was given great authority but offered no guidance on how to carry it. Her duty was to bear heirs and appear virtuous, nothing more. And when she began experiencing power through transgression, through control, by inverting Rome's own sexual hypocrisy, the empire that built her destroyed her. Then, for 2,000 years, they attached a label to her, monster. Today, when you stand among the ruins of the Palatine Hill, you feel a weight in the air. This isn't a ghost story. Rome carries burden more than shivers. The weight of narratives that won't stay silent even when names are scraped away. Because here's the truth about Damnatio memoriae. It doesn't work. You can break statues, erase inscriptions, rewrite records, but you can't eliminate consequences. Messalina's name was supposed to be forgotten. Instead, it became permanent. Not because Rome wanted to remember her, but because truth, no matter how suppressed, finds a way to surface. Empires collapsed from invasions, plagues, economic crises. But Rome leaves another lesson. Rot can also begin from within. Messalina's story isn't just about sexuality or sensation. It's about what power becomes when it turns into a game. About what happens in a system where shame is put into circulation. About a structure where those meant to govern the empire are too corrupted to stop the rot. Every senator she humiliated stayed silent. Every general she blackmailed remained loyal. Everyone who witnessed was added to the chain. Not from loyalty, from shame. What she demonstrated was this. You don't always need an army to control people. Sometimes it's enough to know which truth others fear will emerge. It's easy to think we're different today. Comforting to assume we've left Rome's corruption behind. But look at any modern state, any power structure. How many secrets keep it standing? How many people stay silent because revealing the truth would cost them everything? How much of what we call stability is built on shared silence? Messalina's ghost doesn't just haunt the Palatine. It's felt in the shadow of every palace where power and shame live under the same roof. Nearly a century after Messalina's death, Marcus Aurelius sat on the imperial throne. While trying to make sense of Rome's cycle oscillating between virtue and corruption, he wrote, "Look beneath the surface. Let not the true nature and worth of a thing be hidden from you." Perhaps he wasn't referring directly to Messalina, but he was thinking of people like her. Figures polished outside, unraveled inside. And actually, he was warning us. Because the issue isn't this. Messalina was an exception of unique evil. The issue is this. Rome built her. Married her at 15. Gave her unlimited but directionless power. Then, when that power began making Rome's own hypocrisy visible, it eliminated her, erased her name, but couldn't erase her narrative. 2,000 years later, we're still circling the same question. How do those given authority to protect virtue become the architects of virtue's destruction? You've just witnessed a story Rome wanted to bury, but couldn't. If narratives like this remind you how fragile empires can be and how power can corrupt, subscribe to Sable Historians and help keep the past's voice alive. Because the moment these lessons are forgotten, history begins rewriting itself.